In recent years, thanks largely to erroneous publications and popular video games such as World of Tanks and War Thunder, a comedy of errors has surrounded the history of the officially named Centurion Mantletless Turret. This redesigned turret, intended for installation on the FV4007 Centurion, is often incorrectly identified as the Action X turret, with the X being the Roman numeral for 10. It is also known as the Action 10 or simply as AX. In turn, vehicles fitted with the turret, such as the intended Centurion, then have a false suffix attached to them, Centurion AX being an example. There is also a false belief that the turret is associated with the FV4202 project. However, as we will see, this is not the case. But what is the truth behind the awkwardly titled Centurion Mantletless Turret? Unfortunately, that is currently a hard question to answer, as much information surrounding the turret and its development has been lost to history. Thankfully, due to the efforts of amateur historians and Tank Encyclopedia members Ed Francis and Adam Pawley, some fragments of its history have been recovered. The first falsehood to tackle is the name Action X. The name Action X appeared in a book published in the early 2000s, after the author cited seeing the name written on the back of a photo of the turret. What he fails to mention is that this was written in the 1980s and does not appear in any official material. Welcome to a new Tank Encyclopedia video. If you like our content, check out our Facebook, our Twitter, Instagram or Reddit accounts. Whichever social media you use, we're probably there. Links in the description. By the late 1950s, early 1960s, the FV4007 Centurion had been in service for over 10 years and had already proved to be a reliable vehicle, highly adaptable and well liked by its crews. In those 10 years of service, it had already been in use with two types of turret. The turret of the Mark I Centurion was built to mount the famous 17-pounder gun. It was roughly hexagonal, with a gun mantlet on the leading edge. This gun mantlet did not run the entire width of the turret, but to the left-hand side was a step in the turret face with a large bulbous blister mount for a 20mm Polston cannon. The Centurion Mark II brought with it a new turret. While still roughly hexagonal, the large bulbous front was changed to a slightly narrower casting, with a mantlet that covered most of the turret face. The 20mm Polston mounting was also removed. Large stowage boxes were added to the outer circumference of the turret and gave the tank its instantly recognizable appearance. This turret would stay with the Centurion for the rest of its service life. The FV4201 Chieftain was also in development in the early 1960s, and well on its way to becoming the British Army's next frontline tank. The Chieftain featured a new mantletless turret design. The mantlet is a piece of armor at the breech end of the gun barrel that moves up and down with the gun. On a mantletless turret, the gun simply protrudes through a slot in the turret face. With the Centurion proving to be a great export success, it was hoped the Chieftain would follow suit. The Chieftain was, however, expensive. This would appear to be where the story of the Centurion Mantletless Turret comes in. Evidence suggests that the turret was developed alongside the Centurion and Chieftain as a means of creating a method for poorer countries to upgrade their Centurion fleets if they could not afford to invest in the Chieftain. The design of the turret was quite different from the standard Centurion design, but it remained somewhat familiar to existing Centurion operators, foreign or domestic, making the transition easy on potential crews. A large sloped forehead replaced the mantlet of the standard turret, with sloping cheeks replacing the vertical walls of the original. The coaxial Browning M1919A4 machine gun was moved to the top left corner of the forehead, with the aperture of the coaxial gun surrounded by 3 raised blocks in the cast armor. The machine gun was connected to the main gun via a series of linkages. The gun mount was designed to be adaptable and could carry either the ordnance 20-pounder gun or the more potent and famous L7 105mm gun, making it ideal for operators of both guns. The gun would pivot on trunnions placed in the slightly bulbous turret face, the location of which are identified by welded plugs visible in the turret cheeks. The gun would be aimed via a unity sight that emerged from the turret roof in front of the commander's cupola. Internally, the layout of the turret was pretty standard, with the loader on the left, gunner front right, and the commander behind him in the right rear corner. The decision of what cupola would be equipped on the turret would likely have fallen to the end user. For the trials, the turret was predominantly equipped with a clamshell type cupola, possibly a version of the commander's cupola number 11 Mark II. It had a domed two-piece hatch and around 8 periscopes, and there was a mounting point for a machine gun. The loader had a simple flat two-piece hatch and a single periscope at the front left of the turret roof. The turret bustle stayed the same basic shape, with mounting points for the standard bustle rack or basket. A feature carried over from the standard turret was a small circular hatch in the left turret wall. This was used for loading in ammunition and throwing out spent casings. On both the left and right turret cheeks, there were mounting points for the standard discharger smoke grenade number 1 Mark I launchers. Each launcher featured 2 banks of 3 tubes and were fired electrically from inside the tank. The typical Centurion turret stowage bins were also installed around the outside of the turret, although they were modified to fit the new profile. Unfortunately, most of the armor values of the turret are currently unknown, although the face is around 170mm thick. It is a common misconception that the Centurion Mantletless Turret and the turret of the FV4202 40-ton Centurion prototype are one and the same. The FV4202 was a prototype vehicle developed to test many of the features that would be employed on the Chieftain. However, these turrets are not the same. While they are extremely similar, there are noticeable differences. The Centurion Mantletless Turret is far more angular in its geometry compared to the FV4202 turret, which has a much rounder design. The cheeks of the Centurion turret are straight angles, where the ones on the FV4202 are curved. The trunnion holes on the Centurion are both in a downward angled section, while on the FV4202 the slope is facing up. The armor blocks around the coaxial machine gun are also shallower on the FV4202. It would also appear that the gun was mounted slightly lower in the Centurion design. It is not clear as to whether there are any internal differences. While the turrets are not identical, it is evident that they do share a similar design philosophy, both being mantletless designs with a similarly placed coaxial machine gun. Just 3 of these turrets were built, all of which took part in trials undertaken by the Fighting Vehicle Research and Development Establishment. 2 turrets were mounted on regular Centurion chassis and put through a series of tests. The remaining one was used for gunnery trials. While info on most of the tests has disappeared, details of the gunnery trial that one of the turrets, casting number FV267252, underwent in June 1960 at the request of the Turrets and Sighting Branch are available. The turret was subject to fire from rounds as small as 7.69mm and 12.7mm, through 6, 17 and 20 pounder rounds, as well as 94mm rounds. Both armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds were fired at the turret. The results of the test are displayed on the screen in an extract from the report Trials Group Memorandum on Defensive Firing Trials of Centurion Mantletless Turret, June 1960. The main armament mounting is vulnerable to SA fire directed into the clearance between the cradle and gun port. A large proportion of the bullet splash which enters the turret from an attack is trapped by the internal guards but these are not completely effective over the whole range of elevation, and dangerous fragments are liable to reach crew positions. To achieve complete immunity to splash entry, it would appear to be necessary to supplement the guards with a curtain of flexible but resistant fabric, such as nylon or glass fiber cloth. The MG mounting is well protected externally, and splash entry occurs only when SA fire is directed into the gun port. As this port presents a very small target and the provision of internal splash guards would be difficult, owing to the limitation of space, it is considered that no serious hazard is likely. The 0.125-inch clearance between the gun barrel and each side of the port wall is not sufficient to prevent jamming of the mounting by SAAP and medium caliber AP shot. The main armament port is vulnerable to direct impact HE shells. Blast and fragments can enter the turret through the clearance around the gun cradle and cause injuries to the crew and damage to the splash guards. Interference with the gun recoil and runout can occur from burring of the barrel and cradle end by splinter strikes. The trunnion bearings and pins were satisfactory and withstood heavy attacks on the adjacent armor. The external contour of the turret front is such that a high degree of protection is provided for the trunnion bearings with the minimum weight of armor. Of the free built, just one of the turrets, casting number FV267252 from the 1960 report, now survives. It can be found in the car park of the Tank Museum, Bovington. One turret has disappeared, while the other is known to have been destroyed in further firing trials. Large chunks of the history of the Mantletless Turret remain missing, unfortunately, and the history we do know has been twisted and contorted. The name Action 10 will no doubt continue to plague this turret for years to come, thanks in no small part to Wargaming.net's World of Tanks and Gaijin Entertainment's War Thunder online games. Both have incorporated a Centurion equipped with this turret into their respective games, identifying it as the Centurion AX. World of Tanks is the worst offender, however, as they have also mated the turret with the hull of the FV221 Carnarvon and created the entirely fake Carnarvon AX, a vehicle that never existed in any form.